Uh-huh.
What's your favorite scary movie?
I don't know.
You have to have a favorite. What comes to mind?
You are listening to Scream with Ryan C. Showers, the podcast for Scream fans just like you. Join Ryan every week as he takes a deep dive into the horror film series that defined the 90s and redefined the genre. Scream with Ryan C. Showers is your source for scene and quote analysis, character dissections, and the latest news about upcoming installments of the Scary Movie franchise.
I hear you like horror movies, Kirby, but do you like them as much as him?
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Scream with Ryan C. Showers podcast, where the film critic meets the Scream fan twice a week, every Tuesday and Friday. I'm your host, Ryan C. Showers. Thank you for joining me for today's episode. The episode you're about to hear is one of my favorite episodes I've ever done of this podcast, featuring Ashley, of course, but also the Scream Queens podcast, aka Josh and Justine. And it just so happens that today, the day of release, July 11th, is Justine's birthday. So please join me in wishing Justine a very happy birthday. This episode is really special to me. I had this big splash of inspiration listening to the song Closure by Taylor Swift, and it made me realize some deep things about Sidney Prescott and Gale Weathers and the different types of closure that they find in each of the Scream movies. They're all different. If you look at like Scream 1, 2, and 3, Sidney and Gale, we're not counting Scream 6. We're looking, but those 10 versions of closure for each of the characters, they are kind of sensational and need to be mined and need to be explored and thought about, because it's a very elusive topic. Like, we talk about character arcs all the time, we talk about emotions all the time, but like the specific moment of closure is something different, is something unique, and it's something that we'll explore in the rest of this episode. So I was really inspired by this beautiful song written by Taylor on the album Evermore. So if you feel so inclined, please go listen to it and come back and listen to the rest of this conversation, or listen after you hear us talk about Sidney and Gale. But I think this is like, we're taking this song and really intertwining it with Scream in probably the most incestuous way I've ever tackled a Taylor Swift song on the podcast before. But it's also some of the most like gratifying things you'll hear about Sidney and Gale, like what Ashley and Josh and Justine afford me as the host. I felt actually very humbled doing this recording, because sometimes, I think, oh, of course this has to be it. Like, I know that, I think that I'm right here. But what they actually showed me through this process of talking about Sidney and Gale even surprised me. And it just shows, like, even I'm still learning about these things and uncovering new things about Sidney and Gale and their character arcs, and just this franchise being so deep and rich. And it just makes me, not to beat a dead horse, but it makes me so excited for Scream 7 with Kevin Williamson at the helm. Like, part of the reason why I think the first 4, maybe 5 movies are so deep is because of what Kevin Williamson did in setting up this universe and kind of nurturing it. So I just hope that whatever he does in Scream 7 kind of brings it back to life and gives us that depth and 3-dimension again, where we can have conversations about something elusive like the idea of closure as it pertains to 2 different characters. It's just so interesting. So everybody, I hope that you enjoyed this episode. It's one of my favorite episodes that I've ever done. Also, be sure to check out the episode graphic for this on social media. It is one of also my favorite graphics that has ever been done for the podcast. So this is like a very important episode. Now, before I go any further, I need to thank the producers of Scream with Ryan C. Showers. They include Ashley Summers from the Squirrel and Spud Shop. She and I host a Scream game every Wednesday on Instagram, so please check that out. I also need to thank TJ Jones, who comes from the Box Office Buds podcast. He is responsible for all of the graphic design of Scream with Ryan C. Showers in terms of new episode cards on social media promotion. So thank you so much to TJ for all he does. I also need to thank contributors Mark Karim, Mark Vieira, and Joey Valisi. Joey Valisi is the guy who writes the scripts for Scream with Ryan C. Showers. Episode 112, we wrote a Scream 7 script, which I read out loud, about the end of the Carpenter sisters storyline. And then the sequel to that was called Screams. It was centered around the legacy of Gale Weathers. That's episode 155. And Joey is currently working on the final Scream, which this is a product that is going to examine the relationship, the marriage of Mark and Sidney. Unlike the real Scream 7, this will feature Mark Kincaid as Sidney's husband, and she won't have a teenage daughter. Both of her daughters will be young, so it'll be much different than the real Scream 7 we're going to get. But that is going to be coming to the podcast late summer, early fall, so please tune in for that. I need to thank everybody over at Patreon. Thank you to everybody who subscribes to the Patreon at any and every tier. I'm an independent entity, so any bit of support that comes into the Patreon goes back into the podcast. Joining the Patreon gets you ad-free and early access to every episode, as well as the opportunity to join the community of the show. We have group chats across social media. In particular, Instagram is really the hub of the podcast community. More importantly, joining the Patreon is the vessel in which you would use to come onto the podcast, either in a one-on-one situation with me or a small panel. In addition, there's a guaranteed invite every month to a big group Zoom recording about a Scream topic. An exciting feature of the podcast is the audio commentary episodes. Every Scream fan knows what it was like listening to Wes Craven do the audio commentaries for the original trilogy and Scream 4, with Marianne Maddalena and Kevin Williamson and Patrick Lussier. And what I am trying to do for my Patreon subscribers is I am going to be performing an audio commentary of a Scream or a Scream-related movie, one per month, every month. And my goal is to try to approach these as I'm doing deep analytical analysis about the characters, about the themes, about just general reaction. So it's something that I'm really proud of, and I hope continues to be a cherished part of the podcast. So the commentary is available as a normal podcast episode for anybody to listen to like they would any other podcast, but it will also be available as a video watch along. So everybody, please go over to Patreon, subscribe to Scream with RCS. I would be eternally grateful. So I need to go through and thank everybody over at Patreon who is subscribed as a stab investor or a daddy/mama Ghostface. So the daddy/mama Ghostface of the Patreon are Carrie Tenney, Brett Janovich, Corey Wilson, and Stevie Shears. The stab investors include Allie, Amar Karim, Tamika Jones, David D., Garrison Nichols, Gustavo Mora, Jess Mariano, Joey Nobarini, aka The Vault, Josh Calamari, Josh Carr, Scream Queens podcast, both Josh and Justine, The Horror Project podcast, Justin Weir, Kevin Abner, Mark Vieira, PWO5, aka Philip Douglas, Quentin Harrison, and Sam Levy. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Scream with Ryan C. Showers. I'm your host, Ryan C. Showers, and oh my gosh, this is a jam-packed episode today. I had this inspiration for this specific topic. It all kind of came together serendipitously. I was like, in terms of who I'm sitting here with, what we're going to be talking about, and how we're going to be talking about it. So everybody, please welcome my guests today. Of course, we're sitting here with Ashley from Squirrel and Spud, my producer. Hey, Ash.
Hello.
Where can they find you online?
You can find me at Squirrel and Spud 9 on Instagram. There you'll find my Etsy store, lots of Taylor Swift Scream adjacent things, and you'll also find the Scream puzzle of the week that Ryan and I release every Wednesday.
Awesome. All right. Thanks, Ash. Okay, everybody, please welcome the people, the iconic people from the Scream Queens podcast, the dynamic duo, Josh and Justine. Hey, guys.
Hello, Ryan.
Hello.
Ashley.
What's up, queens?
Oh, my God. So how are you guys? Justine, you start.
Freaking fabulous, queen. Of course, I've got tinsel in my hair. I am ready for summer. Turning 40, going to Mexico, and I'm never coming back.
Well, we love that for you. And can we just say happy freaking birthday? OMG, Justine. That's so cool. I'm like, so I love that you have this big milestone birthday. You're rocking the tinsel in your hair. Gotta say,
I'm staying young, guys, all right?
Oh my gosh. So Josh, how are you?
I'm doing great. Anytime I can talk for an hour and a half about Scream is a great day.
Where can they find you and the Scream Queens podcast online?
Oh my gosh. You can find us at Scream Queens Podcast on Instagram and then at Scream Queens _ right? And just go to Scream Queens Podcast on Facebook if you're old like me. And what else, Josh? You can go to our website, screamqueenspodcast.com.
And you can find us at Scream Queens Horror Road Trip Podcast, anywhere you listen to podcasts.
So today we are going to be talking about Sidney and Gale, and in a very narrowly focused kind of a way. It's not going to be talking about like their character arcs per se. It's not going to be talking about their relationship with each other. It's going to be talking about like the moment that they each find closure in each of the Scream movies. And I was listening to the song Closure by Taylor Swift the other day. I was in a very closure-y kind of a mood. I was kind of like at the precipice of like the end of something, and I was listening to Evermore, which is one of my favorite albums, and like the whole theme of that album is about things that are ending, and so naturally closure is on that, and it just got me thinking about Sidney and Gale and how in each of the films, like the moment of closure that hits is completely different for each of them, and sometimes they get a positive sense of closure, sometimes it's an anti-closure, but it still acts as closure, if that makes sense. So closure is going to be the buzzword of of today. And fittingly, we are going to be making Closure the Taylor Swift song of the week. So Ashley, pretend I didn't say that. What what is the Taylor Swift song of the day?
So the Taylor Swift song of the day is Closure. This song was off of Evermore, which came out in 2020. Thank God, because we all needed something good that year. This was track 14. It was written by Taylor and Aaron Dessner, produced by Aaron Dessner, BJ Burden, and James McAllister. And if you haven't guessed it, this song is about the topic of closure and whether you need it or not, and whether you believe in it or not.
Justine and Josh, I remember we were sitting at Williams Gap Vineyards in Virginia, and we were talking about Taylor Swift. And Justine's like, "I love folklore, but I'm just not there with Evermore yet." And I was like, "Great, so I assign you an Evermore song." But Justine, what are your thoughts on Closure?
I love Taylor Swift. I'm a Swiftie for sure. She's super fun. Okay, so Closure, stay on this ride, buckle in. So Closure to me, it sounds like it has a similar sound to an earlier 2020 album that came out by a fierce, freaking, powerful force of a female, Fiona Apple. So, Fetch the Bolt Cutters, I think, there's a little bit, I feel like some inspiration in there. That background sound that's just kind of like, it's heavy in the song. And so I'm taking it to that if that's the case, and maybe if Taylor got a little inspiration from Fiona, it kind of just lends into that, like all these wonderful women writing these stories about closure, or maybe not, maybe go get the bolt cutters and get me the fuck out of here. I've been in it too long. So I think closure is something that, like, it's like a privilege to have. It's like a gift. A lot of people never receive closure in small amounts or big amounts. And so many of us are forced to go like without it. And I think that song Closure that Taylor wrote, I think it really speaks to, like, yes, I could have it if I wanted it, but if I don't get it, I'm going to make it. And that's such a Sidney/Gale like theme right there. Like survival.
Yeah.
I'll survive even if I don't get closure. I'd love it, but fuck it if I don't.
Well, and like, I also think there's a question of giving and receiving. So, I mean, I think there's also a question that Taylor's asking about giving closure. And like, actually, believe it or not, I'm sitting here, we're talking about Scream 4 for a second. Scream 4 was like the inspiration for, I was listening to the song and I was like, wow, Taylor in this song sounds like Sidney in Scream 4. That sounds silly, but
I love this song. I actually literally like 12 hours ago got home from flying from a funeral, and I literally thought like after that I would have like this epiphany of like feeling better about it, and I was like, well, I don't. So like I'm somebody who's like kind of like, I think there's some things where you can get closure on and some things where you just like you can't. And I don't think this is something where like I'm going to eventually be like, oh, I feel fine about what happened. But also, the person whose funeral I was at is a huge Swiftie, and I know she liked this song. And I've been listening to it, getting prepared for this, and I kind of interpret this song as like almost like a friendship breakup versus like a real breakup. Thinking about all of those like important relationships that you had when you were young, and as you get older, they might fade away and change, or somebody might have really, really hurt you. And something I love about Taylor Swift is like she says that not everybody deserves forgiveness, and that like you can work on moving on for yourself, but not everybody in your life is going to deserve that forgiveness. And I kind of feel like there's a little bit of that personality coming out in this song, and saying like, I want to get closure, not for your benefit, but for mine. And I'm not going to forgive you for you. I'm going to move on for myself. And I love this song. I love the cadence of how she says everything. I love how she says like seeing the shape of your name spells out pain, because I feel like everybody can relate to seeing something, or like seeing the name of that person that caused you pain, or anything that reminds you of them, and it just like triggers that like instant like gut punch where you're just like, oh, I thought I was like doing better, and then all of a sudden I see something that reminds me of you, and it just like cuts to the bone. But I love this song. I feel like it's definitely a little bit different for her discography. I feel like a lot of people won't expect this to be something she writes about, or like if you've only heard "Shake It Off," I don't think this is like what the sound of this song. I don't think is what you're expecting from her. But I highly recommend it. I think it's beautiful, and I think it encapsulates like how it feels to move on for something, but you don't necessarily like you're not necessarily forgiving the person. You're just moving on because that's what's best for you.
Right. And like, so just for the record, like, and then we're going to tie this to Sidney and Gale because like, I had this epiphany thinking about this through the lens of Sidney Prescott, specifically in Scream 4 and specifically about Joel Roberts in the hospital. This song really isn't a fan favorite as I've learned. People don't love like the instrumental aspect of this. And some people think that the lyrics are a bit basic, but I think it's underrated. Before we go any farther, I'd like to read out the lyrics to the song Closure, just so that everybody listening can kind of absorb the specific words here and kind of their meaning as it pertains to Sidney and Gale. Not all together, not holistically, but just like individually, like Sidney in 1, Sidney in 2, Sidney in 3, Sidney in 4, Sidney in 5, Gale in 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5. What this song kind of translates when you put, the lens of the lyrics over Sidney Prescott and Gale Weathers in each movie. And again, in my opinion, I think that Sidney and Gale, all 10 of the performances that we're about to discuss, they are all specifically unique and different. One is not the same as the other. So let's do it. Taylor Swift sings/writes, "It's been a long time, and seeing the shape of your name still spells out pain. It wasn't right, the way it all went down. Looks like you know that now. Yes, I got your letter. Yes, I'm doing better. It cut deep to know ya, right to the bone. I know that it's over. I don't need your closure. Your closure, your closure, your closure. Don't treat me like some situation that needs to be handled. I'm fine with my spite and my tears and my beers and my candles. I can feel you smoothing me over. I know I'm just a wrinkle in your new life. Staying friends would iron it out so nice. Guilty, guilty, reaching out across the sea that you put between you and me, but it's fake and oh so unnecessary." So there's a lot of meaning and emotion in this song that, again, I think you can apply to Scream and specifically. So in my opinion, Taylor's philosophy of closure counterintuitive to some of the ways that normal people talk about closure, which is you confront something, you talk it out, and you move forward. What Taylor Swift is saying is, no, you don't need any of that. You don't need to have a conversation with someone. You don't need to pour your heart out and pretend to mend fences. Like, there is a spectrum of things that you can receive closure for or receive forgiveness for. And sometimes it's simply too painful for the person who was wronged to be reminded of all of those things and give that closure out to somebody who is begging for it. When the person who was wronged gives the person who did the wronging acceptance and closure, that's for them. That satisfies them, but it doesn't necessarily satisfy the person who was wronged. So it's a very generous act to do this. And not everybody deserves this. Not every situation calls for this type of closure. I mean, Taylor is literally saying here that seeing this person's name, hearing from them, it makes her upset. And whenever the person who did the wronging contacts their victim in a way, it's almost re-traumatizing them in a way. It's bothering them. It's preventing them from moving on in a respect. It's counterintuitive to their happiness or to their ability to move on with their life. And again, if the person who was wronged does in fact give that forgiveness and that closure, it only serves the person who did the wronging. In some cases, I think that whenever you extend the grace of forgiveness in certain situations, I think sometimes it does help the person who was wronged to move on, but sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it's easier to just live with, kind of work through those negative feelings and proceed on without having to, come face to face and, hold the hands of people who have hurt them in the past. So in fact, there's potentially an inherent selfishness in terms of closure for the person who's asking for it, and whether they deserve it or not is, of course, in the eye of the beholder. I do think Taylor here is giving a voice to a different type of thinking about past pain here, as opposed to just always having to take the high road. Sometimes it's okay to take the low road. Sometimes the low road is the only way to go. Again, I listened to this song and it just kind of hit me like, oh wow, Sidney's closure in Scream 4 is different than her closure in Scream 2. Her closure in Scream 2 is very sad. Her closure in Scream 3 is very happy. What is Scream 1? What about Scream 5? Does she even have closure in Scream 5? Ooh, but look at Gale's closure. Gale's opposite. What about here? What about there? So that's kind of what we're doing with this episode. Let's talk about what closure means to Sidney and Gale through the Scream films, because, again, I had this spark. I was thinking in terms of and we'll get to Scream 4, but the way that Taylor feels in this song, there's almost something about this song that yes, she's still emotional about the situation. She's still hurt, but there's an element of like, she's not going to be manipulated by anybody. And that's how I feel Sidney is in the hospital scene after Jill's part of the movie comes to a close. So, so that's what was the inspiration for this. And we're going to go through and talk about not necessarily like the end of their character arc, but the specific moment of like, what is their closure at the end of the movie? Because like, the crowning of a character arc is different than how a character has closure, if that makes sense. Closure is almost like this elusive thing that trails after. So so we're going to talk about Scream 1, Scream 2, Scream 3, Scream 4, and Scream 5. And we are going to not include Scream 6 because, in my opinion, there is no closure to Gale Weathers in Scream 6. There's barely a beginning. There's kind of a middle. There is no ending, let alone closure. So I'm sorry, Scream 6, but you can't sit with us this time. All right, guys, let's talk about Sidney and Gale. Okay, so I've kind of pinpointed what I think is their moment of closure. You guys can feel free to disagree with me, but I'm just going to set us up here. So for Sidney, I kind of have the quote "not in my movie" as her moment of closure, and of course, of course, it's that line. But it's not only that line. It's not only that moment. It's like, but for me, this is like such a defining experience for her. So and I see this moment, in her conquering Billy and Stu, and kind of living through the finale and kind of learning what she learns about her mother, right, and Billy's dad. It's a small triumph of personal growth. Like, it's not the Scream 3 kaboom moment of like, oh my gosh, happily ever after, but it's a small, definite triumph that she defeats the killers and she learns the truth about Cotton and that she was wrong. I think there's something humbling in that towards her closure. But the important thing about Sidney's closure in Scream 1 is that it kind of sets her up for a quasi-normal life in Scream 2, which we actually see. So we kind of see her closure in action. And like when we see her in Scream 2, she's actually in pretty good shape. So we know that small triumph, it was effective to from Scream 1 to Scream 2. And then with Gale, I see like her getting to do the reporting, like the very last sequence of Scream 1 where she's doing the reporting in the sunset, that in like doing the reporting of the events and recapping, everything that transpired, that is like, I guess you could say like merely surviving as a supporting character is closure for her. But when Gale flicks her hair and she smiles at the camera, I feel like that is her moment, her specific moment of closure, because it's like, oh, wow, not only did I survive this, but this could do wonders for my career. I finally can make it. I'm finally doing it. I'm doing the thing that I wanted to do. She has this big professional breakthrough, and it allows her to make a big move in terms of reporting on an important story. So she gets kind of closure to a Gale who hadn't made it yet. So what are our thoughts here on the closures of Scream 1? We'll start with Josh.
I agree with everything you just said. And with Sidney, she, like you said, she gains clarity about her mom's legacy and her trust issues, and she regains all her control by coming to terms with it and killing Bill and Stu, and then kind of ultimately trusting Gale. At the end, even though it's brief, they have this moment where you can tell they're kind of like, okay, I got you, you got me, let's finish this up. And like you said, it sets everything up for Scream 2. She's always brave in her own way in Scream 1. She goes out the door, calls their bluff. She stands up to Gale, punches her, and then has the audacity the next day to go up to her and try to have a conversation with her. But yeah, and then with Gale, like, not only does she earn the trust and respect and credibility with the audience, but like, within the movie, kind of as a person and a journalist. Like all the things she has been saying end up being correct. Like Cotton was framed, and you can't blame Sidney. That's kind of like another tragedy of the movie, is that, Sidney was set up. They framed Cotton and she fell into that trap. And so even though I feel like that's something too that Sidney will have to grapple with, and we see that in Scream 2. But I like how Sidney and Gale both kind of seem to come together at the very end and get over whatever issues they had.
I love I didn't even think about that in terms of Gale. She gets to be right too. So not only does she get the moment, the story, the opportunity to report such a big thing, she has the opportunity not to say I told you so, but her credibility is enhanced. Yeah. And I think that's part of that final shot, that flash of the smile, hi, this is Gale Weathers. So I love it. Justine, how about you? What are your thoughts on the closures in Scream 1?
Yeah, I definitely echo what you guys are saying. I think that for Sidney, she gets some resolution and she gets answers. And so I guess in some ways that's closure. But for me, I feel like for Scream 1, Sidney walks away with more questions.
Okay.
And also, she walks away. Like when we meet Sydney, the moment that she and Gail are talking, especially about is that true? I think that there is something in Sydney that she does not quite trust, and we see that throughout just all the movies. She has a hard time trusting. So we don't know where that comes from, right? That could have been like way earlier in life, or that could just be something that I'm interpreting, but it seems like trust for her is like it's very much just on a whim, and it's more of a gut thing, but it can be at somebody else's detriment, as we see Derek in Scream 2. But I think that Sydney learns truths, and truths are closure to a certain extent because you didn't know something and now it is fact. But where maybe like I see closure, how people like sometimes like describe it, and maybe sometimes how I think of it as like something positive. I don't really know if she's walking away with anything like that. I think that Gail walks away with a tremendous amount of closure. She showed up on the scene, the underdog in her realm, not being taken seriously, but she's very vibrant and she's gritty. And she knows that by being a gritty kind of reporter that she can tell a story, and she proves it. It pays off. Like she puts the camera in the room and the rest is history. Like now there's not even like Stu and Billy couldn't even try to pull a fast one over. It's recorded. So she's I wrote down on my little note card, she's ready for the big times, and it shows in the hair flick. Like she knows she's closed one door. She's even like coaching her new camera guy at the end, like this is how you got to be in the big leagues, and she feels it now.
Yeah.
And so I think like she kind of pulls away a little bit of this like positive closure for herself.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying it's not like terrible what's happened to everybody else, but she walks away in kind of like a righteousness, right? Like she was right about it. And now she can build her career on this.
Chills, Justine, chills. You're right. She does get that. She gets that righteousness, that feeling of like, it doesn't even have to be like, ooh, I told you so. It's more so just like, the validation for her within herself. After, everyone viewed her as the villain, as picking on poor little Sydney, she gets the moment of being, I was right. This is great. I think it's interesting what you said about Sydney and not in the trusting. Like, I think, maybe I'm giving Sydney too much credit in terms of, I kind of view it as, I guess I look at Scream 2 and I see that she's doing somewhat okay. And like, but you're right. She kind of ends not in an ambiguous way, but just kind of, you're right. The questions have been answered, but nothing has really come to close, if that makes sense.
And her mom is still dead. Like everything has happened. She's lost even more friends. And the only things that she has learned doesn't bring anybody back.
Yeah. And Tatum, she hasn't even processed everything. So how could she even have closure in this moment, right? Because she lost her best friend. She could maybe not even know who's alive, who's dead. At that point, she saw Kenny, the cameraman, die. There's a lot going on there. All right, Ash, what are your thoughts here on Scream 1?
I would definitely say I agree more with Justine. That I definitely see there's like this moment for Gail of, I think she does have some closure when she's like, I'm going to get the job done. I'm going to finish. I'm going to do what my job is and to report this. But also, like, she is right. And if any of you would have listened to me, none of this would be happening right now. These idiots would be in jail where they deserve to be. The one moment that I see like relief for Sydney is when she sees her dad. And I feel like that's like a moment of of a type of closure, of like a moment of being like, okay, I'm not alone in this anymore. And I really do like how there is this connection with her and Gail. But I think that's like the power of like womanhood. Like I think for most women, when we're in a situation that all of a sudden goes from feeling normal to feeling kind of uneasy, we will naturally, like, I think most of us will naturally look to like, where is another woman in this situation? Where are my girls? And we'll make eye contact and be like, are you seeing this? You're seeing this? Okay, I've got your back. You've got my back. And we're just like making sure that they're aware of like what's going on. And I feel like in Scream 1, it was more of that, just being like, I know I can. There's something where women tend to like trust women over men. No offense, y'all. But we just kind of are like, okay, I feel like this person might be like my safe space, even though I don't feel safe with them on a normal day. In this day, I do. And I can't imagine a teenage girl leaving in that situation with closure, but maybe some relief of feeling that maybe this is the end of this story, and finding out the truth about what happened to your mom, which is like such a special bond that so many people have. I feel like she must have felt confused, but also really happy that there is going to be some resolve to that. And those assholes are dead. Like, good. Like, if you mess with my mom, I'm going to be going feral on your ass. So I'm so happy that she got that. And he's like sleeping with her and manipulative, and Stu's licking people and complaining. And I'm just like, I would be like, oh, you dicks. Like, you dicks. Like, I am so glad that she got the little bit of closure of taking them out, or helping to take them out.
I think of what you're describing about Sidney and Gale, and this kind of goes to the, like you said, the sisterhood, is whenever Gale comes in with a gun and she does the little speech, like, I've got an ending for you. I think that Sidney's reaction to her when she says, I like that ending, that is exactly what you're saying, Ashley.
Yes.
Like, that, like, you know, Spidey sense, like, we're communicating in our minds. I love that. So, well, thank you this is why representation is good, because, like, this was something that I guess I didn't even think about. Like, what teenage girl who just lost her virginity to a serial killer and whose best friend is dead and whose mom is dead, and, like, how would she have closure at this moment? So you're right. Oh my gosh. So, okay. Well, thank you. This was a great discussion of Scream 1. Let's go on to Scream 2. Okay. So here's how I see it. Okay. For Sidney, this is like the anti-closure for Sidney. It is the saddest moment of closure for any Sidney Prescott story, I think. You know, it's her walking away from Cotton, having handed him what he wants, and she is sad. She lost Randy, she lost Derek, she lost Hallie. You know, Dewey's been hurt again. She's been put through hell, and she's walking away holding Derek's necklace after she didn't trust him and he died in front of her. And this kind of forces her to then go into hiding in Scream 3. So the closure of Sidney in Scream 2 is tragedy. It's anti-closure in a way. You know, she ends alone, and Mickey has severely messed with her head, and obviously it leads to her going into isolation. Now, Gale in Scream 2 is interesting because I kind of pinpoint the moment of closure for her is her holding the microphone and seeing Dewey come out, and her pushing the microphone away and running to him. And I think her closure is her putting her heart, which is not, I'm not saying it romantically, but just her heart in terms of what makes her a good or bad person, putting her heart before the story, and kind of like being like this nice little end cap to her overall Scream 2 arc, which is this evolution from bad to good. So that's what I think the closures are. I think Gale obviously has a much more fulfilling closure, happier closure, even though there's probably a lot of, you know, there's a flurry of emotions inside her that she doesn't necessarily feel happy. She's probably devastated and traumatized in that moment. When she sees Dewey, it's also that relief. Let's kick it off. I'm going to start with Justine this time. Justine, what are your thoughts on the Scream 2 closures?
Well, yes, I mean, you're right. Sydney, she just is tragic in this one at the end. When I rewatch Scream 2 and we're watching the camera pull away and she's walking off, I am so deeply saddened for her because it does, especially now knowing that we go into Scream 3 and she is in hiding, that it's not really closure. She's closed off. Like, she's closed herself off from the rest of the world, walking away, walking off screen. Like, I'm all done now. And it's super sad when I think about how 2 doesn't have anything to do with her mom. You know, it's like it's her, it's only her. And so she doesn't even have that to kind of like go back to, of like, I'm having to pay the sins of my mother or something stupid like that. She's just having to deal with more psychotic people, and she doesn't know who to put her trust in. It seems that, like, because she waffled with Mickey, she lost Derek. And because of that, she wasn't going to waffle again. So when Cotton gave her the out, that slight little like eyebrow raise, that nudge of like, you know, that interview is sounding really good right now. She's like, that's it. That's it. Like, that I'm going to waffle this way, because if I don't, I'm dead. Like, I at least have a shot with Cotton, but this way I don't. And it's really sad to watch that back and forth in those last scenes. But yeah, so I think maybe when I see her walking off, I'm sad, and I think, is she walking off feeling like she's a little too broken to continue this way? That she is going to have to escape and be by herself just to live, because she can't have friends without thinking they might be offed by some weirdo who likes the idea of her tragic story. But then there's Gale. Gale, she's she's a detective, she's a sleuth, and she knows that, like, I don't know, when I see Gail at the end and she chooses Dewey, a part of me is like, yeah, girl, because like, that story's yours anyways. People are going to be calling you. You're the person to get the interview. So go, no pun intended, but go shoot your shot. Go climb into that ambulance with your man. I know you just got shot, just moments ago, but you go and get your guy. And so she does have that closure of, like, I'm choosing love, not work.
I love it. Oh my gosh. Perfectly said. And like that, I forgot, like, I missed the thing about Cotton, and I didn't really bake that into my equation, but you're absolutely right. Like being like forced to say yes to him or die, right? That probably, I'm sure like that shock and that like bit of trauma, is really baked into that walking away alone too. Like it adds to all of the loss and all of the sadness too. So wow, you're absolutely right. And I love that too. You're right. Gail would have had the story anyways. Like she's still gonna write the book. It's still hers. So she gets to have her cake and eat it too. So
She got to go get the guy. Yeah.
love it. All right. Josh, what are your thoughts here?
I'm aligning with everything you guys are saying. I think that the end of Scream 2 reinforces the idea that Sidney recognizes that she only has herself to rely on, which is symbolized by her walking away after all this tragedy. But I do feel that the closure in this movie with Sidney is her closure with Cotton. That she has her moment where she gets to hand over the baton to him and say, like, no, he's the hero. We never know. Does she do the Diane Sawyer interview? I don't know. But she hands him that baton, lets him be the hero of the story of Scream 2. She lets him have that moment. And then we see by Scream 3, he's a popular television host. So it seemed to help, at least, her doing that. And I think that's where her closure is, because Scream 2 does kind of have the saddest ending, I feel like, for Sidney. Her best friend died, her boyfriend died, and then she's kind of just left alone to wander back, I guess, to her dorm, like at the end of Scream 2, all alone. And
I'm like stunned. You're absolutely right, because also Sydney's kind of getting closure for, I'm sure Sydney has thought about and maybe feels guilty about the fact that Cotton sat in jail for a year, and it was kind of her fault in a way, or at least her responsibility in a sense, because she testified that it was him. She sent him to jail for a year. And like, so I think that in many ways we could look at that possibly as a positive sense of closure. Like Sydney feels satisfied, like, oh, wow, I may have harmed him unknowingly, but now I can give him this, and now I can walk away from this and never think about him again.
And it even resonates in Scream 3 when she finds out that Cotton has died and she drops the dog food and she's teary-eyed. Like, you get a sense that she's like, I tried to help that situation. I tried to give him his out, and it still came back to bite him in the end. But when it comes to Gail, I love Gail's arc in this movie and her closure, as you will, in this movie. Like, I think she recognizes that her ambition has consequences. She has to watch Dewey, what she thinks in the moment, die, and she's really upset by that. And then in the very end, like Justine said, she chooses to, she moves more towards like sincerity and connection with Dewey at the end than her own ambition.
Yeah. No.
I love that moment when she jumps in the ambulance with him. It's so sweet.
It is like, it's it's nice to look at Scream 1 and 2 side by side, because they almost recreate the shot of Dewey with the ambulance, and like he's rolled out, and Gale does two different things. We see like A and B, and they're polar opposites, and I think that's really cool as a character growth too. So
And I also think Scream 2 is the beginning of where we see the bridge being built between Sidney and Gale, even more so than 1. They both team up and shoot down Mickey at the end. I don't know. I just feel like they have like more of a connection. Even when she sees Gale come out and you have that brief second where you're like, oh, is Gale the killer? You see Sidney be like, what? No, this doesn't make sense. I know you're not a killer. What's going on? And then yeah, at the end, they kind of join forces and take Mickey down. And I feel like, and then, by 3, they're hugging each other. So
you're right. There is some closure almost to the Sidney and Gale beef, the punching in the face. Like they kind of get closure themselves. And this is crazy. I love this. They have closure of their feud with the way that they kind of unite in shooting down Mickey at the end. So we love it.
Because their feud never comes back, really, in the rest of the films. They're copacetic for the most part after that and on the same team.
Love it. Exactly. All right. Ash, what are your thoughts here?
Okay, I'm having so much fun because I just have like a completely different perspective on a couple things. And that's why I love these, is because sometimes I'm like, oh my gosh, I was never thinking about it that way before. But I would say I think like the tiny, like if we go back to Scream 1, I feel like when we finally see a little bit of closure for Sidney is in the beginning of Scream 2 when she answers the phone and like it's like, oh, you're such an idiot to that guy. I know who you are. Like, I know you're not going to mess with me. You're annoying as hell. Like, whatever. And I always like to think of the very first scene we see somebody in and the very last scene we see somebody in as like that comparative. So I love Sidney answering the phone. And then I've always like taken the end of like Scream 2 as like the most powerful moment of Sidney because she's walking off to be by herself. And I think like there's something really powerful of her being like, I am so like, I've always thought of it being like, I am done with this. Go away. I'm giving the baton to Cotton as like a little bit of like a mending of a bridge that wasn't her fault that it was broken to begin with, but is this unfair thing that happened to both of them. And both of them had this tragedy like pushed upon them, and she's just trying to, I think it's like her way of showing the entire public too that like she has no animosity towards him anymore and that she believes that he is a good person and helped her in this moment. And I've always thought of that part being like so like powerful and badass. And so now I want to go rewatch it like literally right this moment and be like, how have I been like, because like every like if how y'all are interpreting it, it's I think that's like what's so fun about films is that I find it like her walking away alone because I feel so uncomfortable alone. Like I'd want to be like in that crowd of people, be like, no one leave my side. I want to be here. But like her just walking and being like, I'm so done with this shit is like how I've always taken it. And then for Gale, like one of the first things we see of her is like somebody calling her out saying like, was all of it worth it? Like, was this worth it? And at the end, she's like, no, what's worth it to me is getting in the back of this ambulance and being with somebody who actually loves me back. Like there's fans and there's press and there's love, but nobody truly loves you back. Like Dewey's going to love you back, or these people that you've bonded with are going to care about you. And I feel like her closure is realizing that the fame and all of that isn't what is necessarily like gonna make her the happiest in life. Just like coming into a perspective of being like, I've already accomplished so much in my career. I'm gonna go make find somebody to love me for who I am. And but like I also feel like in closure, I feel like when Sidney is like saying, like you're forgetting one thing about Billy Loomis, like I fucking killed him. Like to me, that's putting closure on like the first chapter. And now she's moving through the second one. And I feel like we continue to see closure I feel like we almost see closure for the previous movie and the next installment. Like we see how she's moved on, if that makes sense. But I'm just so excited to talk about this because I love hearing everybody's perspectives and how like I'm like, oh my God, I saw that so different. And then being like, I don't think anybody's wrong, but I like feel like I want to go watch it and be like, maybe at the end of Scream 2 now I'll be sobbing instead of being like, yeah. And so
Ash, I love your interpretation because you're right. And like, you have to be a very strong person to walk away alone, I think anybody who is a loner or who has been, forced to kind of carry things by their own, think of like a single mom, like you have to be tough as nails. And I think like, to look at that scene as something of strength of that Sidney is choosing to go by herself and to be alone. There is an underrated mental health of her physical health in that moment, right? And of her understanding of herself. So I love that so much. So yeah, love it. And I love doing episodes like this too. This is like my favorite thing to do with the podcast is do weird, very specific things like this and just go 10 miles deep. So
I was going to say, I agree with Ashley as like, when you watch Scream 2 as like a standalone, that's how I've always taken the ending is that she's having her moment. She's walking away. She's strong. And I kind of still think that in a way, but it's like when you connect it to 3 and then she's in hiding, like something happened along the way. But yeah, I think as a standalone film, when you watch it, there is that closure of her like, okay, this happened. Handed the baton over to Cotton. I'm walking back to my dorm strong and self-assured. But then they gave us Scream 3 and she's in isolation and scared. But yeah, that's what's so fun about these movies. You can think about them in so many different ways and interpret the motivations and what they're thinking and feeling in so many different ways.
you're so right. You can look at this just as individual standalone movies. You can look at this as like a part 1, part 2. You can look at this as a trilogy, as a quadrilogy, as the first 5 films, the ones with Sidney, all 6 movies with Gale Weathers, or in general for the franchise and leave with a different interpretation that are all equal and valid. All right, well, you brought up Scream 3 and how Scream 3 kind of, reshapes Sidney Prescott and I would argue it kind of brings everything from Scream 1 and 2 to a different kind of closure. So let's talk about it. So in Scream 3, my moment of closure for Sidney isn't the epilogue. It's not when she's walking with her dog. It's not the door. I actually think it's actually the shot where she's leaning up against the wall. Dewey has just kind of shot Roman, a million times. And it's when she's just leaning against the wall. There's almost like this, to me, whenever just looking at Nev and the expression on her face and the physical body language, there's almost this epic closure, like she's exhausted. It's like she's a soldier on the battlefield who just won the war and it's over. And I think that everything she learns in that screening room with Roman about her mother, the fact that she confronted her fears, the fact that she outsmarted Roman again and again and again and finally beat him, and she learned the truth about her family that ailed her, why all of this happened. She gets so much closure in that. And I think that even just that moment of her, that's whenever she can actually start to relax and put her shoulders down and not be so tense. It's almost like all of the questions have been answered, and that is her moment of closure before we begin to see that closure in action, which I think is the epilogue. That, and of course, this is all encompassing for the trilogy, right? So Gale's is a bit harder to pin down. Maybe not. Maybe I'm overthinking it, but I have it being when she's talking to Dewey before they get engaged, as her saying, I'm done with that kind of reporting. And, if you think about Gale in Scream 3, she has reached a lot of milestones by the end of it. She helps solve the Maureen Prescott story. It's kind of like her life's work. This has been her baby for the past 5 years. And, she kind of, with that, she kind of pivots to another type of career. We don't know. She hasn't said specifically, but she wants to do something different as opposed to the type of grueling reporting that she's been doing, which is interesting. And on top of that, she does kind of get to fulfill the will they, won't they with Dewey. She really gets to be, happy and kind of have a relationship and a connection that is fulfilling. And I don't want to make Gale's closure the fact that she just gets Dewey, because that would be almost dismissive of her three-dimensional aspect as a woman in a horror movie. So that's how I see Gale in Scream 3. I don't know. So let's start with Justine again. Justine, what are your thoughts on the closures in Scream 3?
Well, I think for Scream 3, we get probably our most Spielberg-esque ending with closure. It's beautifully tied up in a nice bow, and I would say we have a good balance from the kind of closure that we got in Scream 2. So I don't even mean that in a cheesy way. I appreciate the ending of Scream 3 because Scream 2 was bleak. It was oh my gosh, is this person's life now that everywhere she goes, people want to put that costume on and terrorize her? And because it just took one lunatic's convincing of another lunatic, and then they just massacred a whole university of people. So when it goes all the way at the end of Scream 3, I'm yay, this is beautiful and wonderful. And everyone is getting their happy ending, which is what I hate so much about Scream 6, where they just say it. They're just she just needs her happy ending. What? No, at least Scream 3 let me see it. At least Scream 3 let me see Gale become elevate, move up, want to do something different, be better. And we don't know what that looks like. In Scream 4, we see that she's writing a lot of books. Maybe she just goes to the keyboards and is no longer behind the camera at all. But I like the fairy tale ending that we get in Scream 3 because of what we had for Scream 2. And with Sidney, she gets this family backstory thrown in her face and pieced together, and it's all making sense, but it also doesn't make sense. And now she has this brother, but he's trying to kill her. So she gets a wonderful move on moment, and it's just a door, a literal door opens for her. It allows, for myself as the viewer, it allows me to breathe. I can just release my breath after holding it for, if I've been in this for 3 movies, then I'm holding my breath for Sidney for 3 movies. And now I can breathe because she can breathe.
I never thought of Scream 3 as the Steven Spielberg moment, but that is perfect. That's what it is. And that's what I love about it. So I think that's such a interesting take on Scream 3's epilogue, and just kind of like the general, everything that the characters work towards. And I also like your reading of the door. She literally has a door open for her, that's beautifully said. So love it. Cool. Justine, anything else?
I think just that in the case of Gail, like a lot of women, I know we are always trying to find like a balance in life and maybe just in people. You're trying to find a balance in life between like if you're passionate about your work, then it not being the driving force of your life, but it being a main road that you're taking, but then also choosing this like idea of like love and maybe a family and whatever that looks like and building on that and having years with someone. And I think that for her, we just really get to see that. Like she starts to put a balance, like she put the scales out, and that ring that gets dropped in, that balances them for her, I think.
Love it. I love it. Josh, what about you?
I'll start with Gail. One thing I love about Gail in Scream 3 is that she's a little less cynical, she's a little more thoughtful, and her relationship with Dewey has kind of softened her defenses in a way, and she acts more as an investigator and a support system. It seems like maybe she's not chasing the fame as much in Scream 3 as she was in 1 and 2. And she's helping solve the case this time. That seems to be her motivation, not so much like, how in Scream 1 she's like, oh, what this can do for my book sales. We don't really get that Gale, which I think is a great arc through 3 movies. By the time we get to 3, she's genuinely wanting to help the situation. And what I love is, her closure is her closure with Dewey in Scream 3. She reunites with Dewey, and at first, they have like their funny, like almost like rom-com banter for like an hour or so. But she gets with Dewey in a more grounded, genuine way. And by the end of it, like I might have said earlier, she's part of the team. She's not really an outsider anymore. And that's what I like as her closure. Like I think she'll say in Scream 4, like, I helped solve these, like 3 times, or whatever. And that's true. She's always been part of the reason why they're able to take down the killer at the end, is because Gail has been as helpful as she can. And she kind of recognizes that and is, like I said, more of the team, not an outsider by the very end. I mean, she's hanging out at Sydney's house at the end. So there we go.
I love that. Gail's closure is that she becomes part of the team, like in a real, genuine way, not like, okay, we'll make her part of the team. No, she's there. So I love that.
Yeah. And with Sydney, obviously, it's, there's so much symbolism with her leaving the gate open, leaving the door open. But one of the other things is she also leaves her heart open. We see her with Derek at the end making popcorn. And so, she's allowing love back
Mark,
in her life. What did I say?
Derek.
He's always on your mind, I guess.
You know me, I'm always well, after everything that happened to Derek, she's allowing love back into her life with Mark.
The first Mark.
Yeah.
Not her forever guy, but just the guy
Right.
that's opening the door again.
She loves that name,
Yes. I love it. Oh my gosh. It's funny because like I happen to have a lot of Joshes in my life. I feel like Sydney's version of Josh for me is Mark. We love it.
Yeah. And I will say, like, Sydney has a huge arc in Scream 3. She's living off the grid at the very beginning, scared, even has her name changed for her job. And by the end, she's as fierce as she's always been in Scream 1 and 2, and is able to, fully confront and lay to rest her trauma of her past. She holds and grips her brother's hand as she kills him. She's able to like come to terms with her own identity and what her mother's legacy has meant to her and what it's done to her. And I feel like she really lets it all go by the end of Scream 3.
Yeah, that's a beautiful way of putting it. And like, again, I think that moment of when she holds Roman's hand, just to give it another shout out, is like, yeah, that is closure for her. Because imagine Sydney in therapy, for years thinking about and talking about like about her brother that she had to kill because he was killing all these people and had all this resentment towards her. And I think by holding his hand, she kind of lets herself off the hook later on, by taking the high road in that moment. That's that's why I think, like, going back to Taylor's song, like sometimes it's okay to take the high road and the low road. And I think Sidney made the right choice here by kind of holding his hand, showing that empathy so that she can live with herself down the road. And that it's easier for her to move on. And I think that's why we see Sidney in such a calm place in Scream 4, as opposed to being resentful, probably like I would have. So, I mean, Sidney Prescott, you are, a wonderful human being. So.
And I'll say too, when it comes to Scream 3, I think it really gives closure more so than the other two movies with Sidney and Gale. By the time the movie's over, it really solidifies their alliance, and they're no longer rivals, but they're like comrades at this point. Like there's never any more situation where they have that awkward hug, and you can tell they're trying in Scream 3. They're kind of getting over it, but I feel like by the end of Scream 3 they're over it.
Exactly. So, all right, Ash, bring it on.
So I love what everybody's been saying. I completely agree. I feel like I've always interpreted Sydney's isolation of coming from like blame and her not being necessarily scared for herself, but for the people that she allows into her life, and not wanting to have people that she cares about around her because she's scared that that's just gonna lead to their literal demise. And that I feel like I see a lot of closure in her inviting people over at the end of the movie. She's allowing these people to be part of her life. She's not isolating herself to protect herself or others anymore. She's realizing that people want to be in her life for her and love her and respect her and want to be part of it. And I think even when you see what Sydney's job is, you realize that she is a really caring person who really does want the best for others, and her realizing that her not being in other people's lives isn't like the solution to the problem. And I've always thought of like, if I found out what happens to Maureen Prescott happened to my mom, the respect I would gain from her and the pain and the shame that I would have realized that my mom would have been like hiding would have like broken my heart in a totally different way. But I feel like she gets a little like revenge at the end, like seeing all of these people taken down. And I've always thought when she's holding Roman's hand is also closure for her relationship with her and her mom. She's holding her brother's hand for her mom, being like, I'm going to be gentle right now because like this is something that was so shameful for my mom to have dealt with, and not knowing how to deal with that situation. I always felt like it was a little like nod to her relationship with her mom in that moment as well. And with Gale, I feel like Gale just learned, like, I think seeing all these people like craving fame and like being in Hollywood and dressing like her and acting how in a crazy campy version of like how she used to act, she must have been like shit, like, and like her perspective must have kind of she must have like realized like where she was going wrong in some ways in the past. And I think it's okay for somebody to like, for a female character to be driven by love and be driven by like wanting to get back the thing that you feel like you've lost, and it might have been like a whole lot of your fault in how you handled things and not being able to express yourself. And I think she's also someone who almost isolates herself in a different way than Sidney did, but allowing herself to be loved for who she is, I think is like a really beautiful thing that Gale is able to do at the end of that movie, and realize that all of these people really do care about her, and like allowing herself, like I think allowing yourself to be loved is really, really hard for some people. And I think they both are allowing themselves to be like, be in a space where they can be, people want to be with around them for them, and they don't care about all the other bullshit that might come from it.
You brought up the fact that like Sydney is inviting people over into her house. Like that is I mean, like that's so obvious. Of course, I mean, like, and I've never even thought about that, but of course, like the visuals of that, like having people in her house as opposed to her locking up the doors and it's just her and her dog, that you're so right about that. Mind blown about Sydney. I think that you actually hit the nail on the head about Gale in Scream 3. She literally sees an old version of herself, a version of herself that she's definitely not that person anymore, but she can see the traces of like, ooh, wow, I really was this and this and this. So it almost like moves her even more into the, evolved Gale. And, we talked about this in Afterglow recently, the Gale Weathers episode, where I think that she does seek Sydney and Dewey's validation in certain respects. And like she craves it in like a very insecure way. The way you say that she is allowing herself to be loved and allowing herself to be a hero or be seen by these people and held by these people, I think is a really good way of describing her at the end of Scream 3. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, let's move on to Scream 4, the movie that inspired the entire episode. So with Sydney in Scream 4, I kind of see such a huge change in Sydney, or I see like the closure of Sydney on display throughout the hospital scene. And I think it's about her attitude about Jill. And again, like I think this most comes out in Taylor's song. Closure, where in my opinion, I don't think Sydney needs anything at the end of this movie. She doesn't need anything from the situation. She just needs the situation to move on. Like she's just, I think that she's disappointed and upset for how Jill betrayed her and she thought she was protecting her. But I don't think Sydney lets it bother her or, change her or make her a certain way. I think that like Sydney's at such a plateau in Scream 4 overall that, she has such control over herself and over her emotions and over, her life, that I think it's just consistent through the end. So after she learns that Jill is the killer and she's disappointed by that, she can move on and kind of, I think that there's an element of her at the end of Scream 4 in the hospital scene where she's over Jill. She's over the betrayal. She's over the nonsense of Jill. And she's just so like, like Taylor says, I've got your letter and I'm doing better. Cut deep to know ya. I don't need your closure. Like, get away from me. And in some way, like, someone earlier said that, like, it's almost like, I think Ashley did, it's about the movie before that we see the closure of in the current movie. And in some way, I think Out of Darkness and writing that book is Sydney's closure of the original trilogy and of being afraid. And I think at the end of Scream 4 in the hospital scene, I think Sydney kind of makes a decision to not let Jill disrupt that, which I think is a very beautiful thing. I just see Sydney as being so consistent and, like, constant in Scream 4 about her control and not letting what happened bother her. And with Gale, I see like it's hard because with Gale, she doesn't get like a moment of closure. But I see just like the overall impact of what happens with Gale in Scream 4. The closure Gale gets is that she's kind of relaunching her career and her self-worth. It's not so much closure she gets in Scream 4, but it's almost like everything that happens reawakens her. So, whenever we see her in the hospital and, as she's kind of in that room with Dewey and Sydney, who are in much worse shape physically than she is, she's already been reactivated and she's kind of already on the path of getting back to her old self or having self-worth again in a different kind of a way. So that's how I see these two in Scream 4. Josh, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree with what you're saying. I feel like for Sydney, this is her most self-assured until we get to 5, She's more proactive than ever. Like when they first start seeing Olivia being killed, she runs next door and tries to help out. And by the end of the movie, like you said, I feel like even though it was like these family ties, I think she's over it. She doesn't mind, offing Jill because she has to. And she has that moment where she looks at her and, oh, what's the exact line? What does she say to her?
I don't know about you, but I feel a whole lot better.
Yes. And so I get a sense that she's just like, okay, this one has ended. I've done it again. I survived another one. I don't know about you, but I feel so much better. And with Gale, I feel like she really is reclaiming her identity as an investigative journalist, not so much kind of like with 3, not so much seeking the fame, but just trying to find who she is again, trying to find the story that's going to make her relevant again. And which she does with this story, apparently, you get the sense that she's going to write about it. It really launches her, like it gives her a sense of identity with Dewey when she's like, no, I'm going to do this. I'm going to go rogue, whether you help me or not. Because both of them, like, they've been through this so many times at this point that, they kind of know what they're dealing with, but they're able to shut it down in their own ways. And, with like Sydney, she asserts her survival. Her past comes back to haunt her, but at the same time, it's really not about her in this one. It's about Jill wanting to be famous. It's not about your mother did this or that, or our mother did this or that. It's just a bratty teen wanting to be famous. And
Yeah.
I don't think that affects Sydney as much as maybe 1 through 3. She's able to kill her off, work through it, and like we said, say that I don't know about you, but I feel better.
Well, you mentioned that line, I don't know about you, but I feel a whole lot better. And then I don't know if you guys have ever noticed this, but like with the face that Nev makes when she's looking at Jill and she like turns back towards the camera and there's almost like a smirk. She kind of purses her lips. And again, she's over it. And I feel like, again, going back to the song, there's a line in the bridge. She says, but it's fake and it's oh so unnecessary. And I feel like that's how Sydney feels. Like she's like, oh, this is just so unnecessary. Like,
Or your mother mother, my aunt, was our connection. I hardly knew you. You tried to kill me, so whatever. It's kind of how I take the end.
All right, Justine, how about you?
Yeah, for Sydney, if there's closure for her to gain at the end of four, because I think she clearly has had closure at the beginning, but for the movie itself, for just what had transpired, I think she gains clarity that like that one of those just like it's not you, it's me, but in reverse. Like for her, she's like, no, girl, I mean, it was all you. Like you were trying to be a pick me girl. You were trying to be self-important and springboard off my fame. You know, you were getting me for clout. I got you, but I'm gonna kill you. Like at the end of the day, the clarity, or as Brene Brown would put it, you know, to be clear is to be kind. And so she clearly offed her in a kindness because Jill wasn't helping herself or anyone else. I do think Sydney is like a huge force to be reckoned with in four. And I think at times she feels like she might be playing with field mice. Like these are teenagers that are playing her game. This is her board, and she's moved all these pieces before, and she always wins. So I think that for her, it was ensuring the survival of the core three of them, like making sure that Gale, making sure that Dewey, like that's it. That's all she needs. That's her end game. She doesn't have family ties anymore. Like she does not know any of those binds. She knows what was bought in blood, sweat, and tears.
Well, also, I think it's funny the way that, like, a sign of Sydney's apathy or her literal closure here, like, we're not even going to discuss Jill. Like, Dewey asks, what hit me? And Sydney says, don't ask. Like, we're not even talking about it. It's not even worth it. My wounds were in the ICU. I can't deal with this, Dewey. We're not even going to discuss this. I think that's so true. And, like, you had me howling at the pick me girl. That is so Jill. Oh my God. Like, and the idea of that being, it's not me, it's you, like that, that is so true.
She just needed to be famous. But I do think for Gail, there is this like re-energizing, which I think happens naturally for people. We get sedentary. So like I think it's just her getting back into her roots and she's having fun with it. Even though we're talking about like people are getting murdered and stuff, like she's grooving around. She's got the like little mask on and stuff when she's at the showing of Stab and everybody's in the barn and she's just getting back into her element. But we're years later. Like these people are smarter, they're more evolved, they survived three and now they're just much more wiser. So I just think in a lot of ways in four we see a game of chess that's being played, but they are checkmate. Like they win, and it's because they're playing with young children.
I love it. And I think that you're absolutely right about Gail. Like the way that she's re-energized is natural. I think that the Gail of three would always come back to this moment. The way that she is proceeding is different, but it's still fun to see her having fun again, and there's some closure in just the potential of what's going to come. Like this was fun. And just, this is what launches her back into, game time. So we love it. Cool. Ash, what are your thoughts here?
Yeah, I completely agree. I feel like Sydney really takes like the role of protector in this movie. And something I really love is that she's desensitized to like some of this crap, like the silliness of it. But when she sees someone hurt or in pain or something, she still shows so much empathy and is disgusted by the actions of others. And I think some of the reason why she must like really just like despise Jill by the end of this movie is because she harmed all the people that Sydney's lost in like her life. For perspective, like she hurts her best friend, she takes her mom, like she's like, you killed your own mother, like she's like, because you want fame, like she's like, she knows what that pain is like for anybody to experience and to lose friends and your boyfriend and all of these people. And she's like, you're doing this yourself. Like I experienced all these losses, but you're doing them, like you're committing them. And I feel like there's like this like different duality of these two personalities that come from that cut from like literally the same cloth of this family. And Jill is just like inherently jealous of this popularity that Sydney doesn't even want. Like, and I feel like her writing the book is her way of trying to say like, okay, like here's my story. I'm finally giving it to you, to the public. And now can we like move on from like you asking me about it every day? And then she's
Sounds like
just
the manuscript.
yes, exactly. And she's just so ready to be done with all of it. And for Gail, I feel like she just shows how she like is passionate about what she's passionate about. I feel like she has been trying to find inspiration in something and she just hasn't been able to do it. And then all of this chaos starts happening and she's like, I'm good at this shit. I'm good at protecting the people that are around me. I'm good at figuring out who the bad guy is. I'm good at all of this, and she is without Sidney and Gale, like these movies would have been really really short. And she just finds this way of being so funny. Like she even like drops like the term circle jerk, and somehow you're just like, I love this woman so much. And it's just like, I love how she's like calling out all like the young teenage boys of being like, you're little creeps. And just like she's like already got her eyes on everybody, like trying to figure it out. And I feel like they and Gail have these like opposite ways of like looking at things, but it like goes like through like the same perspective. And I love them so much. And I feel like Gail is just so like such a powerhouse. And she might have just been, yeah, I think she just like needed to find inspiration to find herself again in like her career and like some of those aspects of her life that mean so much to her. But I love how we find out that like she clearly still is like super in love with Dewey, because like even the mention of lemon squares is like pissing her off. She's like, your lemon squares taste like ass or whatever she says. And like, you're only saying that if you love your partner, right? Like you don't care if someone's baking them like making them baked goods unless like you care about them. And I love where they both are in life and how they're both just so sick of all this nonsense and how they're just like, okay, back at it again. This is my job. I'm going to take care of it. And then these petty little losers who are doing all of this can be gone.
Ashley, I think you hit on something really good. I think that you're so right. Jill like disrespects what it is to lose a mother, what it is to lose a best friend. And I think why Sidney acts in like the Taylor Swift song Closure, I think that's why that comes through in Sidney in the last scene. She's like, I'm okay with this. Let's move on. Like, you know, in terms of like, I think it's about a disrespect of Jill. Like, how can Sidney possibly look at this person as compared to Roman, let's be real, you know, and think, how can I have empathy for this person, even if she is my family? I just don't respect her at all. This is ridiculous. And I love what you said about Gail and like the terms of like the reason that motivates her is like, you know, in the fact that Dewey kind of closes her out from the investigation. She's saying, but I'm good at this. This is what I do. I'm good at figuring out what happens and I'm good at protecting people. And you're right. So I love that Gail she knows that about herself. And that's what we see kind of run through her arc and kind of launch her again. So good. Ashley, you made me want to watch Scream 4 right now. I'm just like, ooh, must watch.
What, 14 years since Scream 4? Because of Ashley, just got this like mind blown of like, oh my God, all the devastation that Jill caused was what Sidney naturally went through. Her mom, her boyfriend, her best friend. How had I never connected that before? Thanks, Ashley.
You are so welcome. But Scream 4 is my baby, so I love it.
Yeah,
I love Scream 4.
All right. Well, and let's round out with Scream 5. So with Sidney, it's really hard. And I mean, like, obviously there's a clear moment of closure, which is her saying, I'll survive, I always do. This is, you know, her sitting in the ambulance with Gail. They've defeated the killers. She's going home to her kids and her husband. But, you know, for me, this is hard because, like, you know, we never get to see Sidney truly react to Dewey's death on her level. Not, you know, she's there to support Gail, but we never really get to see Sidney react for her. And that bothers me. So in a way, like, you know, I don't know if we can call it closure, because it never feels like anything was ever truly like reawakened for Sidney in a way. Like for Sidney, she's just there and kind of unchallenged for most of the movie. Like even in the finale, like she's not as like emotionally invested or devastated as she is in the other films. But the line itself is beautiful and it's symbolic and it shows wisdom and peace. And the closure, it's almost like, you know, I feel like with Sidney, it's just we get this one beautiful music note, and that's what that line is. This I'll survive, I always do. And for Gail, it's the complete opposite. Like she actually does get the full arc. This is, you know, we've talked about Gail, and I've actually noticed what all of you have said about her as we've gone through. And every single film, she has had a positive moment of closure, a happiness kind of closure. And this is the first time we see her in a sad, tragic, unhappy closure. But it's beautiful, you know, in terms of like having reunited with Dewey, having lost him, and then getting to avenge his death. You know, her closure is the classic kind of like tragic closure we see in literature all the time. You know, I think killing Amber and having these personal revelations about the Dewey book, and, you know, even if she doesn't fulfill it in Scream 6, even she's saying it, and that's her closure, is her saying, I'm not going to be writing about Richie and Amber, I'm going to be writing about Dewey because that's what matters. I think that is her closure to his death. I think that's her closure in this moment. And we can pretend like she wrote the book about him in Scream 6. So, all right. So let's start. Let's kick it off with Justine. Thoughts on Sidney and Gale here?
Oh, okay. Well, yeah, I mean, Sydney is the survivor. She's through and through. She's at a point now where she's going to be like a mentor, to Sam in a way of like kind of like showing how you move on and what is it like to live in a world where you've witnessed such devastation. And also, like when you have a complex like history of your parents, like you didn't know everything or you didn't know them at all if you're Sam, but Sydney not really knowing everything and having to learn about her mom after she had passed. And for Sam, like she's learning about who her dad is and then what he did, and obviously all of the domino effect that's taken place since. So I think Sydney, she gets to walk away knowing she has her family and that she is on the other side now of like maybe being a guide. But I think Gail gets kind of the more hardcore closure of like that just like that whole chapter and that whole story, the will they won't they, well that's over now, and so she can move on and her story is going to continue, but like she does get like that kind of like that chapter's done, and it's very sad.
Yeah. Oh, wow. I never even thought about that. Like her closure is kind of the closure of Dewey and even the closure of her divorce, right? Because she didn't really get closure from Dewey when he left in New York. She is getting closure now, which is a really, really sad thing. But wow, I love it. Josh, how about you?
Yeah, to start with Sydney, I feel like we start with Sydney's closure. Like when we start the movie or when we first contact Sydney, she's moved on, she's married, has kids, and is no longer the hunted. And ultimately, she returns out of loyalty and responsibility. And even though we don't get to see her breakdown scene about Dewey, I've always gotten a really sense of sadness when she greets Gail. They have that hug and that moment where, to me, I can see they're both very devastated. But Sydney's story feels emotionally complete already, like when she joins. But I do love when Gail tells her, like, do it for Dewey. And you get that awesome shot from behind Sydney where she's going to re enter the house again. And that's one of my favorite sequences of 5 is Sydney re-entering the house and shooting out and fighting Ghostface, falling over the banister onto the floor. Like that's one of my favorite moments. And to me, it's just showing like how calm and collected and tactical Sydney is and how all these years of these situations have brought her to this moment where she's like, okay, I got to do this one last time up until Scream 7 to where like I've got to go help. This is my responsibility. I'm going to do this for Dewey. Gail is hurt. I got to do it for the both of us. That's kind of where I see that. And even her handing off the gun to Gail seems like maybe not closure, but it's like definitely a character arc between the two. Like, no, I don't have to be the star this time. This one's for you. This hurts you more. This was your husband. You kill Amber, And especially with Gail, like you see how deeply affected she was by Dewey's death, even though they've apparently have been divorced or separated. Do they ever make that clear if they're actually divorced or just separated?
I think divorced.
Yeah, that's what I've always assumed. Like with her closure, it's more about like her grieving Dewey, but also recommitting to writing with more purpose and sincerity when she has that moment at the end when she's like, I think I know what I'm going to write about. It's going to be about a guy that was oh God, I'm not quoting things accurately tonight, but like a guy that was a
Used to be
great.
sheriff here once.
Yes, I used to be sheriff here once. And, but since we're talking about the two characters, what I really love is the relationship, maybe like closure between Sydney and Gale. Like they're united in grief. They're kind of like now bonded through battle. Sidney and Gale are survivors, and they're less rivals now. They're more like sisters in arms. And their connection is solidified, as the last women standing. In over 5 films, Sidney and Gale have evolved from adversaries to allies to equals. Their individual arcs are very rich. Sidney goes from victim to survivor to mentor. Gale from exploitive reporter to courageous truth teller. And together they represent like 2 different kinds of strength, like emotional and intellectual, soft and hard, private and public, but always resilient. And their shared trauma becomes their like shared trust. This is why I'm really craving Scream 7. I want to see them together fighting Ghostface, like I said, like a sister in arms. They're like in this together. I want to see them as like the 2 best final girls ever in Scream 7.
Yeah. I love this. And you kind of gave me a light bulb moment here. In Scream 5, we almost get to see like Sydney's Scream 5 presents it as so wrapped up. Every time we see Sydney, it's almost like we get moments of closure for her, things that symbolize like a moving on. And the gun is one of them. Like Sydney's moving on. She's past this. She's handing it to Gale. Her walk through the house. There's a closure in that because it's like a place that haunted her so badly. And now she's the one in control. And like, also at the beginning when we see her running with her kids, there's closure in that. Like she's thriving. Like I've always thought that that's great visual language. And I like what you said about Gale writing, because if, earlier in the film, Dewey says you were always happiest when you were writing, and Gale says, well, I don't have time to write anymore because of my job. So the fact that she wants to write about Dewey is very beautiful. So, in a form of closure. So love it.
Yeah.
And I agree with you about Scream 7. All right, Ash, bring it home.
Yeah, so I'm just sitting here like reading the lyrics of Closure again, and I think like the opening of it saying like, it's been a long time, and seeing the shape of your name still spells out pain. It wasn't right the way it all went down. Looks like you know that now. And I feel like that could be like Sydney speaking to the ghost faces of Scream 5 and saying, like, you realize like how much pain this caused people. And this is all like, I always call them bullshit. Like when it comes to like the Scream or the ghost faces, I'm like, they're just losers who like want friends and don't have them. But I feel like that encapsulates like kind of like how like she must be feeling of being like, it's been a long time since I've seen literally like the shape of Ghostface, and like the thought of it still spells out like it's still so much pain that's like inside of me. But clearly, like clearly the person who's doing these horrible acts knows that, and I'm not going to allow it to manipulate me. And then like I feel like this one part is like, I know we're talking about Gale and Sid, but I feel like this could be Dewey and Scream Fine, like of, don't treat me like some situation that needs to be handled. I'm fine with my spite and my tears and my beers. I feel like that's
Literally
a little Dewey coded. And I find this one hard to kind of figure out like where their closure is, because I feel like they've already like experienced it and now they're just like reliving something. And they're almost just like so sick of it. And the only thing they really need closure from is more of the loss of like such a dear friend and like a companion through life. It's more about Dewey for me than like what's actually happening in Scream 5. And I feel like they both, like that moment like where you hear like a kid in a movie or something yell, I need an adult. I've like realized like now like I am the adult, and I'm like, holy shit, like if a kid like yelled I need help, I'd be like, oh my god, they're gonna come to me because they think I'm adult, even though like I don't feel like an adult. But Sidney and Gale are like the adults in the situation, and they're the ones who have to be like, okay, like there's these young people and I need to help guide them through this situation. And obviously they can. And I feel like it's more of like that, like Josh said, like that mentor helping these women realize what their life's going to be like now and figuring it all out and just being for them in like the way that they can. And I feel like there must be some really confusing closure in helping others deal through something that you've already experienced, because you're horrified that it's happening, but you being able to give your knowledge and your perspective to these people must be really rewarding in when you see the outcome of how the majority of them survived, and you're able to guide them and teach them maybe a way to process what's happening to them. And so I really only feel like there's closure in that. And because I can't imagine having any closure of the loss of Dewey, like I still don't have closure, and it's a fictional character.
I think that like also bringing David back for Scream 7 is a way of kind of like processing some closure, I think. So I think that I think everything you said here is really true. And I think it's smart to loop in kind of who they are and what they represent in terms of Sam and Tara too. So very good. Guys, this was a beautiful episode. Oh my God, you guys, all three of you individually like touched me like so deeply about these movies. This is what I love to do with this show. So thank you for taking my very narrowly focused idea about a Taylor Swift song and turning it into a Scream discussion and running with me. So Josh, Justine, Ashley, oh my God, I love you guys so much. Justine, thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me. I love you so much.
Josh, thank you for coming. Oh my God.
Thank you. Always love chatting with you and seeing you in person, having wine with you.
Fuck yeah. But no, I had so much fun with you guys in person. I can't wait for you guys to come back up because it will be, and I was like, when I hung out with you guys at the winery, it was just like, I felt like I was hanging out with people I had known literally for years and years. And we technically have, but like in person, it was a weird thing. So
I know. You're our podcast bestie.
Wonderful.
And Ashley, thank you so much for helping with this episode. You were amazing. So I love you as well.
I'll always talk about Taylor and Scream.
Thank you so much for this wonderful episode.
All copyrighted material used or referenced in this show belong to their rightful owners and made possible by the Fair Use Act.
And number 3, never, ever, ever, under any circumstances say, I'll be right back. Because you won't be back. Get another beer, you want one? Yeah, sure. I'll be right back!